Hi, this is Matthias from mamoworld.com, and in this tutorial I want to explain to you how to write your own tools for Premiere Pro to work with metadata. As an example, what we want to create is a little tool where you can annotate to the sequences of your project, or also to footage if you want, which person from our team is currently working on that sequence. And we will create a little tool with a drop-down list where you can just choose the person from your team, and it will set the metadata for the active sequence or for the selected items, for example. Let's see how this is working. We create a new script. So we go here and just go on new to have a blank canvas to arrange our blocks. And metadata is something that is attached to project items. So we go here in the category project items, and here we find the block get metadata and set metadata. And what we want to do in this case is to set the metadata. Yeah? And here you've got the list of all metadata information that you can modify. And the most important thing to understand is that this is not all you can do. These are just the most common properties that all clips actually have. And now what we want to do, we want to create our own custom metadata type, so to speak. So to do this, we right-click here in our project panel on the title row here and click metadata display. This is where you can manage metadata. And here you've got all metadata properties that are available, and here you can add your own one. And let me call this one mamoworld team member. So the idea is that here we store in this tag the person who is currently working on that clip or sequence, and I call it mamoworld to make sure it's like a unique name, that it's really something nobody else is using and we might mess up some other workflow. So we want to store some text in this. And now if you go here to the Premiere Pro project metadata, you can see that at the very bottom of this list we've got the mamoworld team member, and it's already checked here. And checked means that it's shown here in the project panel. You can also delete it here if you want. So if we go on OK, you should see here now mamoworld team member. And we could here now, for example, enter Matthias. And now this metadata is saved with this project item. And you can also annotate it to a sequence. So what we want to do now is set this information not manually, but we want to set it with a script. So we first need to get this particular entry, so mamoworld team member, or this item, in this list in order to choose it, because this is what we want to set. Yeah? So what we need to do for this, we need to have an item, a project item, with this metadata on it in our timeline. And then we select this item and click this refresh icon here. And what this does, it loads all metadata that is attached to this clip in this dropdown. So in other words, you just need one example with this metadata in order to read it here and have it here in this list. And here we should see now somewhere, here it's very bottom, mamoworld team member, which is in this particular case here set to Matthias. So now we've chosen what metadata we want to set. And here you need to enter which project item. So if you want to set it to this project item here, for example, you can click this refresh and it enters \main sequence. So this means it will search for the project entry with name main sequence in the root bin of the project. If you want to set it for this one, for example, and click refresh, then it writes here in the bin footage, in the sub bin African Scenics. This is exactly where we are here. The item with this name is what we want to set. Okay, and if we set this here to Emily Anderson, for example, and run the tool, you can see that for this entry it has been set to Emily Anderson now. Now here you can enter whatever you want, so also something like, for example, the active sequence. Yeah, if you want to say we always want to have a tool which sets this particular entry, mamoworld team member, for the active sequence, then we just go here to Premiere Pro sequence and say active sequence. And if we now have the main sequence here active and run the tool, you can see that in the main sequence also Emily Anderson has been added here now. Now wouldn't it be cool if we had this entry here as a user interface? Yeah? So we can go here to the user interface and comments and take this very first block, which is an input. This is a block which creates inputs in this panel. By default, it creates a single line text, and we can just drag it here and call this, for example, team member. And here you can enter some default value that will show up here. And you can see if we run the tool now, it replaced here Emily Anderson by default value. Yeah. Now, this block code says, set the metadata entry team member of the active sequence to whatever the user entered here as this user interface. If you have just a handful of people in your team and you don't want to write the names manually, you could also enter here, for example, a drop-down list. Team member has now option 1, option 2, and option 3. Now let's say our team members are Emily Anderson, James Rodriguez, and Sarah Chang. And note that I separated the different options with such a vertical line here. Now we've got this nice drop-down here, and if I choose James Rodriguez and run our tool, you can see that James Rodriguez has been entered here. And if I go to Emily Anderson and run the tool, you can see this updates instantly. Now let's say we do not want to set this metadata just for a single entry, but we want to set it for multiple entries at once. So the easiest thing we could do is to do it, for example, for all selected entries. For this, we need to call this block here multiple times, namely for each selected project item. So we go here to project items again, and you can see here an for each item block, which allows you to do exactly this. So we drag this inside of here, such that now this entry is called for whatever items we specify here. Currently it says for each item as my item. This means the items we actually choose are stored in the variable my item, and this means here we don't want to set the metadata of the active sequence, but instead, so I delete this, but instead of my item. So after we inserted this green block here, the variable my item has been created, and I can drag it here. So if we have 6 project items selected, for example, this green block will execute the brown set metadata block 6 times in total. And the first time, the variable my item will contain the first selected item, the second time, my item will contain the second selected item, and so on. And in the options of the green block, you can configure which project items you want to use exactly. So by default, it uses all selected project items, but you can customize that. So this first line here effectively says for each item of the project, because it says for each item in the bin, root bin, if you enter nothing here, it's a root bin, and all its subbins. These are all items. If you just want to process all items in the root bin and nothing here in other bins, then you could also just say in bin, root bin. This will also only process, in this case, this item, this folder item, and this folder item here, or bin item actually. If you want to say I only want to process the entries in the folder or in the bin Africa Cinex, you could just select Africa Cinex here and refresh, and then it will enter here for each item in the bin footage / Africa Cinex. Now it will only process these items. And for each of these items, it will call this block here once and set my item to one of them here one by one. So it will first call this block with this, with my item set to this. Then it will call this block with my item set to this item, and so on. So we can test this. Let me uncheck this, because currently we don't want to only process selected items. We run, and it will fill in Emily Anderson in all items in this bin. If we just say, if we want to limit this to selected items, we can just go here and check this, selected items, and we want to set this time not to Emily Anderson, but to James Rodriguez. And let me also, for the fun of it, select this item here too, the main sequence. If we now run the tool, you can see they updated and this one didn't, because currently we say only in this bin here all selected items is what we want to process. If we want to process all selected items in all bins, we get rid of this here, and now we've got it in the root bin, and we want to say in the bin, root bin, and all its subbins. If we run now, you can see all of the selected items changed to James Rodriguez. And if we now update it again to Sarah Chang, for example, now it updated to Sarah Chang. Finally, you can limit the items you want to process also by type. So for example, maybe you never want to change this entry for bins. Then you can just uncheck this here, and then even if this bin is selected, if we run the tool, you can see nothing is entered here because I unchecked it. So this is in a nutshell how you set metadata with automation blocks. You can create your own user interfaces to create metadata quickly. And of course, you could combine this block also with something like the spreadsheet blocks we have if you want to set metadata fully automatically based on spreadsheets, for example. But this is a little bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. If you've got further questions, you can also always ask us in the Adobe forums. That's it for this tutorial. My name is Matthias, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next one.